Alright, so today we're looking at assembling the candle box kit. What I have here is all the materials that it comes with. I'll also point out a few materials that you're going to need. The only thing you really need at home is a Phillips head screwdriver, right? That's the plus sign style screwdriver. This is a multi-tipped one. This actually came from the dollar store, so that's an easy way of getting one. If you really need a screwdriver, let me know. I can probably hook you up. The kit comes with 8 screws. All right, so there's a baggie with screws in it. The bag also has 3 pieces of sandpaper in it. They'll be nice and new when you get them. These ones are a little bit used. And then it'll have the pile of parts. It should have a lid. It should have 2 short sides, which are different heights. One has 2 grooves, one only has 1 groove. You should have 2 long sides and a bottom. All right. There's a few other things that might be helpful as you work. I'll point those out in a few minutes. But the first step basically is to sand your parts. You have the 3 pieces of sandpaper. On the backs, they should have numbers. This is 100 grit. This is 150 grit. And this piece ended up with no number, but this is 220 grit. The numbers would have been right here, and they just didn't show up the way this one tore. But if you touch them, you can also feel that this is the roughest, medium, and finest. So I would start my sanding with the 100 grit. I like to fold my sandpaper when I sand. And you always want to sand with the grain lines. All right, I'm removing dirt. I'm removing any little chips and things like that that may have happened on the edges of a board. Okay, the amount of effort you put into that may vary based on how rough your boards are, how nice your boards are. All right, but I'm going to go through every single board with that 100 grit. When I think they're all nice, I want to move up to the 150 grit. Okay, I'm actually going to sand my bottom a little bit because I think this was a little bit rough. So I like to fold my sandpaper in half. It gives me a little bit of friction on the back to help hold onto it. Okay. Sometimes I even sand the edges on plywood just to make them a little easier to work with. Because sometimes you can get some little splinters going on there. When I think I have everything sanded up, right, and I've done it with the 100 and the 150. The last grit I'm going to do is the 250. I'm sorry, 220. This is really smooth. It makes it feel really nice. All right. And then I'm pretty much done with sanding. I may come back a little bit at the very end, and I'll kind of explain that to you guys, but that's the most part of it. You want to go all the way around. I do want to focus on the lid for a second, though, because the lid's kind of a unique part. And I actually have a sample lid here. This one is kind of, it's not a perfect one. It has like a defect here and some other issues with it, but I hung on to this from when we made them. An optional item you may want is a piece of wood or something that's hard. You know, you can find an object from around the house that's kind of rectangular. Can be almost anything that isn't squishy. But you can wrap a piece of sandpaper around it. So if you have a piece of scrap wood, and it can just be an item that you own that is hard, but you put the paper side of the sandpaper around it, and that actually helps you sand these angled parts. Because it gives you a hard surface to push against the edge of this while you're pushing down on the angled part. So that does help speed up the sanding process. The other thing that it's good for is my top has a defect right here. Okay? If I sand with my hand, my fingers will go into the divot and continue to sand the divot. But if I use a block of some sort, that helps flatten out the high spots without sanding the low spots. And that's really the best way to remove something like that. All right, but hopefully your pieces don't have something like that. That was one of the reasons why this one got pulled. It's a quality control issue. It's really hard to use the block on the end here. I don't recommend sanding against the grain. You're going to get scratches in the end that aren't going to be nice. All right, so for the end, you may have to just go back to doing it by hand and real short strokes. I know it's a little bit annoying to do that, but it's going to be the best way to sand that and not have scratches in it. Your top is going to be the part people are going to see the most, so that's kind of a spot I would like to focus, personally, attention on sanding. Because the blade cut this at an angle, sometimes you'll see some swirl marks from the blade there, and that's what you want to try and sand out. All right? So once I have everything sanded up and I'm happy with it, I'm ready to assemble my box. Now, I'm going to need all the parts. I'm going to need the screwdriver. There's a couple other things that you may find handy, and it depends what you have around the house. You could use an additional person's set of hands. They could help you hold things. That might be helpful. If you have some tools in the garage or the shed or something like that, a clamp would be super useful. If you don't have that, some masking tape or a big rubber band, any of those things could help you hold your project together while you're trying to put the screws in. So, here's the side of my project. Here's the other side. I like to assemble this all together at once, so I'm going to put my bottom in here. I'm going to put my lid in here, in its slot. Whoops, and that fell out. So that way it helps me line up these ends. The reason I'm worried about lining these things up nicely is that the lid has to slide in its track there, and if they don't line up, it could create an issue where your lid doesn't want to go in its spot correctly. So it's helpful to kind of have it all together. So now I'm going to slide this piece on. This is where I'm saying having an extra set of hands might be useful if you're trying to move this around. All right, and then this end piece only has one groove because it only connects to my bottom because the lid slides past that. So now I have my box mostly together, and I want to screw it together, but it's going to keep wanting to wobble apart. So if you have no help and no other items around, you may have to just fight with it, and I might try and hold it while I put the screw in. If you have some tape, you could take a big piece of tape, put that across there nice and tight to help hold that together. Same thing, I could take a rubber band, stretch that over my box, and that could help hold it together. Whatever you can do to help make it less frustrating for you so the box doesn't fall apart is great. I do like to try to check that my lid will function the right way and slide into that slot before I start screwing it together. Then I'm going to take my screwdriver and my screws, and I'm going to start screwing the box together. You have pre-drilled holes on the outside of the box, but the inner piece, you're actually making that hole. So you do have to put a little pressure on it. You do have to push a little bit. It's not too hard though because this is pine, which is a pretty soft wood. Okay, and you just screw till it hits the bottom of that little indentation, that countersink that I put in there for you. Excuse me. Alright, so it's up to you whether you want to do all four on one side first or you want to skip around. If I was working by myself, I'd probably skip around because as I get screws in each end, it gets a little easier. If you have a clamp or you tape it or whatever, then you can kind of do it however you want. Right? So I might do opposite corners first. This is actually the first screw that's going to help hold that front piece in. Alright, I'm trying to make sure things are pushed in so the ends are flat as best I can as I assemble this. It's relatively easy. I mean, this whole project was designed so you could build it at home without a lot of tools, or assemble it at home without a lot of tools. Your hand might get tired from doing the screws. You know, you can always walk away and take a break, come back. I haven't finished this yet. There's other screws on the other side I didn't quite get in yet, but it's good enough to kind of do a test, I think. I've got all 4 screws on the one side here, and I've got 2 on that side. I just want to take the rubber band off and the tape off. I want to see if my lid will slide and close the way I want. And it does. It slides and closes really nice. I did this earlier for a demo, and this back piece wasn't quite lined up right, and the lid kept like getting stuck out. It didn't want to quite close, and so that's probably the hardest part of the whole thing. Is just making sure your lid closes nicely. I would be disappointed for you if your lid didn't want to close, or it closed crooked or something weird. So that's one thing to take a look at. So I have 2 more screws to do here, and then we'll talk about the last minute sanding stuff that I do after I put my project together. Right? But I've pre-sanded everything. I think it's all smooth. I've got no defects on it, like pencil marks, dirt. There's the signs that the saw had cut things are sanded away. Once this whole thing is assembled, I like to go back with the 220 grit sandpaper. You could even do the 150 if you really wanted to. And I like to knock off the sharp corners. All right? So I hit the corners of this. This just makes it feel really good when you touch it, because you never hit a sharp corner. You're not going to like bust your knuckle open reaching inside. So I like to knock off all those sharp edges. And I do this after the project is assembled, so I don't accidentally round over edges that aren't going to matter. You know, that get contained inside the box, get hidden. All right? But I just do my best to sand it up and make it feel nice everywhere. I put my name on the bottom because I like to sign my work. This is going to outlast me. If I give this away to somebody, you know, they'll have it for a long time. As long as they don't leave it outside in the rain or something like that, it'll last a very long time. And you know, my nieces have things that their grandfather made when he was in high school woodworking, and so you know, I like to document when I made this. So if you put your name there, that looks good. The finish, the final part of this project, you can leave it bare wood if you want to, right? If you don't have anything at home you can use as a finish, that's okay. I am making it like an extra, like the next step up for grading. And you'll see that in the assignment that the B+ is the highest grade you can get for just assembly. The A+ project is going to be finished in some way, whether you choose to paint this, stain it, put a clear finish on it, whatever you choose to do to it to make it look finished. The finish can add beauty, it can help protect the wood. So if you choose to paint this, great. If you choose to do clear finish, that's also cool. And if you want to leave it plain, I understand, you know, you might not be here at school to do the finish. The students that are in person will be doing finish on their projects in class here. If you're about to finish it, I would take a damp paper towel. Take a paper towel or a piece of t-shirt, you know, a rag, an old sock, whatever. Get it wet, squeeze the extra water out, and wipe everything down. Let it dry, and you'll feel little fibers raised up on the wood. It won't feel as nice as it does right now because you sanded it. Then go back and sand it again with the 220. That's called raising the grain. After it dries, sand it again is what I meant. And that will make it feel really nice again. And now when you go to put your paint or your finish on it, that shouldn't happen. The fiber shouldn't stand up. and make your paint job or your finish job feel rough, okay? And when you do your finish, just like sanding, try and go with the grain, you know, brush strokes. You kind of want them going with the grain. It might be something that you wipe on. There's lots of different finishes you could use. You could get mineral oil from the drugstore. That's what you use for cutting boards. It's relatively cheap. It's an oil. You wipe it on. That will need to be reapplied if you want really long-term protection from that, because it does sort of soak in and just kind of lose its finish, you know, over time. But that will seal the grain and prevent some of those things. You can just wipe it on with a soft cloth, you know, old sock, whatever. You can get acrylic paints from the dollar store. There's lots and lots of options for finish. But for here at school, we're going to use tung oil. I'll give the students some rags, and they'll put tung oil on the rag. They'll wipe it on the project. It's important to leave the lid separate when it dries, okay? And don't leave it in there, because the finish or the paint could glue it shut. Also, try to be careful how much paint and finish you put in the groove. You don't want blobs in there that are going to make the lid not want to fit next time, all right? If you're doing this at home, please be considerate of mom and dad and their furniture or whoever, right? You may want to put something down to protect the surface if you're working on the table. Maybe a trash bag. You know, you can cut it with scissors and lay it out flat like a tablecloth to collect anything that you drip. You may also want to put this up in the air so it doesn't touch anything, it doesn't dry flat. If you put newspaper down, it'll get glued to it. Something, again, a little tiny piece of wood, just some sort of object from around the house. I've actually used a stack of quarters, like 2 or 3 quarters at each end, and set something on it to dry, just so the air can get around it and it doesn't get glued down. Same thing on the underside of the box. It's a good idea so it doesn't get glued to your table or your tablecloth or whatever. All right? So that's the basics of sanding, assembling, and getting ready for your finish if you choose to do that. I hope you guys have good luck with this, and I really hope you guys enjoy your candle box. This will be a nice little thing for you to own for many years to come, and a little reminder of virtual school in 2021.